For those of you just joining us, we'll wait just a few minutes past the hour to make sure everyone has a few minutes to log in, and then we'll begin. Everyone is muted, by the way. For those of you just joining us, we will begin in just a few moments. We have several people on the line and several still logging in, so we'll give it just a few moments for everyone to have a chance to log into the webinar before we begin. Welcome, everyone, to our first RxTalks webinar, brought to you by OmedaRx. We're very happy to kick off this webinar series with this audience. Today we have our resident speakers, our own Dr. Shirley Reitz and Rich Adams. My name is Dana Madison, and I'll be one of your moderators, joined by Allison Donahue. We'll keep things running behind the scenes. Today I'll go over some housekeeping items, introduce our speakers, then pass it over to them to review our topic. And we'll wrap up our session with questions and answers. Out of respect for our presenters, everyone is automatically muted. We will capture questions throughout the presentation using the dialog box. Simply submit your questions, and we will send them to the presenters to read and answer later in the presentation. Today's session will be recorded. As mentioned, our speakers today are Dr. Shirley Reitz and Rich Adams. Dr. Reitz currently serves as a clinical pharmacist client manager for OmedaRx, where she has strategic responsibility for developing, communicating, and reporting the outcomes of clinical initiatives impacting both cost and quality of care to members and clients. Before joining OmedaRx, Dr. Reitz was Director of Pharmacy Clinical Services at a large health cooperative, where she was responsible for designing and implementing medication use management initiatives. Rich Adams currently serves as the Director of Product and Business Development at OmedaRx, where he oversees sales, account management, and product development. Before coming to OmedaRx, Rich held various sales leadership positions at industry-leading healthcare companies. Rich's career work focuses on helping organizations navigate the new health economy. With that, I'm going to hand it off to Rich Adams. Rich, take it away.
Well, thank you, Dana. Appreciate it very much. We've got a lot to cover. Let's jump right in. Today we're going to talk about 5 key drivers in pharmacy cost, 5 proven solutions that OmedaRx has in the marketplace, and then we're going to open it up for questions and answers. As we take a step back and we look at the healthcare industry, the insurance industry over the last several years, we see that we're experiencing a tremendous amount of change, whether it be from regulatory changes, mergers and acquisitions, changes in demography. It's impacting us all, and pharmacy has not escaped this change as well. And as we look at total U.S. prescription drug spend from 2006 forecasted through 2022, we see that from 2006 to 2012 it was relatively calm sailing. We saw 2 to 2.5 to just about a 3% compound annual growth rate in pharmaceutical spending for the entire country on the commercial group side. But then suddenly in 2013, 2014, we see a pretty significant spike. And of course, we all know that that's related to the 3 hepatitis C products that were approved by the FDA, Harvoni, Sovaldi, and Vicaripac. And we saw in 2014, 175,000 Americans take that medicine. In 2015, we saw 250,000 people take that medicine. And at $1,000 a day for 90-day treatment, that contributed heavily to the increase in prescription drug spend. But that's a defined universe of people. There are only 3 million of those folks that have hepatitis C in the United States, so there must be something else going on driving these costs overall. So Dr. Reitz, as we take a look at this cost curve, the increase in drug spend, we'd be remiss without talking about brand drug price increases as a driver for this trend. Can you share with me from your and the audience, from your perspective, from a clinical perspective, what's going on with brand drugs?
Well, thanks, Rich. Hi, everybody. Yes, brand drug prices do continue to increase, as Rich talked about. From 2013 on to 2022, it's really projected about 6.3% increase in overall spending. Not only the hepatitis C drugs are involved in this, but there are a number of other drugs that came out in the last few years that are impacting the cost of these medications, or cost of this increase. These drugs include drugs for the treatment of disease states such as oncology, multiple sclerosis, and autoimmune disorders such as rheumatoid arthritis and psoriasis. They also have had a large impact on this drug trend that we have seen. But the other sort of interesting factor that we kind of have to keep in mind is that back in 2012 and 2013, when we actually saw sort of a dip in the total cost of care, that was actually due to a large number of generics that came on the market at that time, actually mitigating the increased costs that we saw with the brand products. Unfortunately, we don't have that same sort of level of generics coming out on the market. And even if they are, their prices are not dropping off as precipitously as they have in the past. So we're not seeing that sort of mitigating effect of generics on the marketplace anymore. And in fact, sometimes the generics are actually increasing the cost of care because their prices are continuing to increase.
That makes sense, Dr. Reitz. But why are the price increases so high? What makes them so great?
So I want to look at this next slide here first, and this actually gives us some of the increases that we have seen internally in our drug prices. So for example, if you look on the left side of this graph, you see Humira and you see Enbrel, two drugs that between 2012 and current date have increased 85% and 80% respectively in that short amount of time. And if you look at the left side of that graph, there are two other drugs that I've listed there. One is injectable Isoprel, and one is Nitropress, also an injectable medication, both of which are used in the hospital, both of which are old medications, but which have now become what we call single source. In other words, there's really only one manufacturer, so they're really dictating price. And you can see that their price increase has been 726% for Isoprel and over almost 2,000% for Nitropress. Pretty scary increases in prices.
And I would imagine that manufacturing costs, simple inflation, mergers and acquisitions, and other types of pricing strategies are coming into play. Could you talk a little bit more about what those mean in particular and how they're having an impact on overall spend?
Right. Thanks, Rich. So yes, with a number of with the increased regulatory oversight by the FDA, a number of manufacturers have made large financial investments to update their facilities. What this has resulted in is increased costs, which are then passed on to the consumers. We've also seen a lot of mergers and acquisitions, particularly in the generic manufacturing market or generic industry, and those have reduced the number of competitors. A great example of this is a drug that everyone's very familiar with called digoxin. Back about 10 years ago, there were 8 different manufacturers of this product. Now we're down to 3, and over that period of time, the cost for that drug has soared over 600%.
Dr. Reitz, in your clinical opinion, do you see brand drug price increases continuing into the long-term future or short-term future, or mitigating over time? Or what's your perspective on that?
Yeah, I actually see that this is going to be a trend that we're going to continue to see. And one of the reasons is because of the way that pharmaceutical industry has sort of changed their model of how they're pricing medications. In the past, we used to price medications based off of what the cost of developing, of doing the research, of marketing those medications, and then adding on, obviously, something for them to make money. So sort of a cost-plus model. That's changed with the advent of the Hep C medications back a couple years ago. They really started pricing their medications based on what a perceived value of that medication in the marketplace might be. So in other words, what do we think we can get for this medication based on the disease state that it's used to treat and how much people will be willing to pay for it. So as I said, a really good example of that is the hepatitis C medications.
Thank you. You mentioned specialty drugs, and certainly that's a very common word in the press right now, but so are words like blockbuster, budget buster, market mover, and they're related to specialty drugs. What makes specialty drugs different? Are there a lot of them? Are they materially significant from a cost standpoint? Tell us what you can about specialty drugs in general.
Well, specialty drugs are indeed a different class of drugs. In general, they're very expensive. They may often require special handling. They're given very often by either IV infusion or subcutaneous administration. They sometimes require special management as far as where you store those medications. And some require special monitoring to ensure their safe and effective use. This group of drugs is probably the most dynamic group of drugs out in the market as far as their impact on drug costs. From the IMS Institute of Healthcare Informatics, they show that between 2014 and 2015, that class of drugs increased over 21% in total cost. This graphic that you see now gives us a visual portrayal of what we consider sort of blockbuster medications that we can expect to see in the next year. This is provided to us from Walgreens, who does an evaluation of looking at these medications that are coming out in the next 9 to 12 months. Blockbuster drugs are those drugs that are really expected to have a significant impact on the marketplace, either by their cost or by the number of patients that are projected to use these medications. You can see from this graphic there's over 40 medications on this diagram between that either have been approved already at the end of last year, the beginning of this year, all the way out through about March of 2017. Many of these medications that are on this pipeline over the past year have been, really drugs that develop a miracle cure or really help the patient improve their outcomes or their quality of life. So they're important drugs, and they're important for us to consider them, and because of the impact on the patient's quality of life. You really think of the drugs like the Hep C drugs, which really cure the treatment or cure the disease, but we also see medications on this graphic for the treatment of specific types of asthma that has really been very difficult to treat in the past, or for the management of different types of cancer, or even for the treatment of psychosis that's associated with Parkinson's disease, giving patients options that they haven't had in the past.
And I would imagine that these medicines are extremely expensive. And for those of us on the phone or those of us in the industry or employers, it presents us with a significant challenge in terms of how do we balance the cost of these medicines versus the value that it provides to individuals as we look to improve the quality of life of people in the United States.
So one of the things that I want to point out on this graphic is you see the top half above the green line are really medications that are considered blockbuster that are expected to be managed under the pharmacy benefit. But if we look at those medications that are under the green line, those are medications that are expected to be covered under the medical benefit. So here in this graphic, I've just highlighted those that are on the medical side of the benefit. 5 years ago, we wouldn't have seen this. We would have not seen as many drugs under the medical benefit, and most of them would have been above that green line. The issue that that's before us right now is that many pharmacy benefit managers really only have access to information for the cost of drugs that are above the line, those that are going to be managed under that pharmacy benefit. If you as an employer group or whomever are not really looking at all of these medications, you are missing over half of your potential drug costs. And very often traditional pharmacy benefit utilization management practices are not applied to those medications that fall below this line. So it's really an important consideration for you to think about as you look for your sort of total cost of care for disease management.
Dr. Reitz, why is it that a PBM, or why is it difficult to actually look at these, to actually see these or manage these medicines that are on the medical benefit as opposed to managing them on the pharmacy benefit?
Well, because most pharmacy benefit managers won't have access to this information. It's going to go in to the health plan under the medical benefit, and they won't be able, they may not have access to that information.
Okay, thank you. Certainly the federal government and the FDA in particular, the Federal Drug Administration, play a critical role in the pipeline and specialty medicines and the increase, or actually mitigating the increase in costs over time. From your clinical perspective, what role does the FDA play, and how is it having an impact on spend overall?
So there are a number of programs that the FDA has implemented over the past 20 years that actually sped up the rate of drug approval. One of these major programs is one that requires pharmaceutical companies to pay what I would call a user fee that helps support the costs of the FDA review for their drug. In addition, the FDA has developed a number of different tracks, and you can see that on the right-hand side of this graphic, this fast track, the breakthrough therapy, accelerated approval, and priority review that expedite the development and review of drugs which either meet an unmet need out in the healthcare marketplace, or that demonstrate substantial improvement over a therapy that's already available. we can see from the bar graph on the left side is that these different programs do tend to have an impact on the number and the speed at which drugs are being approved by the FDA. You know, this past year in 2015, we had 79 drugs approved. In 2014, 74, significantly more than around the 50 mark that we've seen in years past. But there's additional work that's going on at the FDA that's really significant that we should spend a little time talking about, and that is the work that they're doing around biosimilars. Now, biosimilars are not the same as generic drugs, and it's really important to understand that difference and how complex this conversation is and how difficult it has been for the FDA to really come up with some clear guidance for people regarding biosimilars. If you think about conventional drugs, they come from molecules or chemicals, and therefore their structure is fairly easy to define and to replicate as a generic. And so once that patent on the brand has expired, it's fairly easy for generic companies to replicate that chemical molecule. However, biologics come from a living organism, and which are, as by nature, just variable, and they generally are more complex and not as easy to define or to duplicate. And so therefore the manufacturing process becomes very complex. So the FDA has struggled over the years to try to help define and provide some guidance to industry regarding what is considered a biosimilar. And over the last year to 2 years, they finally actually developed some of that guidance, and now we have started to see actually some biosimilars come out on the marketplace. The first two that came out, one was for Neupogen, and later one that just recently came out is for Remicade. Later this year, we expect to see a biosimilar come out for Lantus. And there are probably about 6 more that are waiting in the wings for their approval from the FDA.
Two clarifying questions for you, Dr. Reitz. Generic drugs have, as you mentioned, had a significant and continue to have a material impact in terms of offsetting brand price increases or brand price overall. Do you see biosimilars having a similar impact? One. And then second, you talked a little bit about how the FDA has accelerated the approval process. And sometimes we see when things accelerate, quality criteria goes down. Is quality a criteria in terms of the medicines that are being approved? Is that a concern from a clinical perspective as well?
So the first question again, sorry, is?
Biosimilars. Would we expect biosimilars to be a much lower price point?
Oh, sorry. Yes, no, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for reminding me.
Sure.
Yeah, so there's actually some good data which shows that biosimilars, in fact, do not provide us with a good, a reduced price point like we see with the generic products. The biosimilars that are available are at a very small, have a very small cost differential from the products that are already on the market, the reference products. So we're not seeing the cost savings from the biosimilars like we see from the generics. Mm-hmm. Your second question around sort of the quality, has it changed the quality of the review that the FDA is doing based on some of the speedier approval process? And you know, yes, there are some concerns about that have been raised by consumer groups and others, that in fact the drugs that are coming out may not have had as rigorous of review, do not have as many clinical endpoints that have been studied. They don't fully understand maybe the side effect profile of the medication quite as completely as they would if they had gone through a full review and not an expedited review. So to mitigate some of that, the FDA is requiring a number of these drugs to actually continue to do some research regarding these medications after they are after they have been marketed, to get information back to the FDA regarding some of the utilization and side effects that they're seeing, so that we can be really clear and careful about how safe these medications are in the long run.
So there are some emerging challenges, it sounds like, in terms of determining which medicines are right or which medicines are more effective at any given point in time. Yeah. You mentioned the word marketing, and that makes me think of an article that I read a little while ago that said that if a patient were in a doctor's office and they read or they saw an advertisement for a medicine, they were nine times more likely to ask that doctor about that medicine. If a patient saw an advertisement on television for a medicine, they were 3 times more likely. From your clinical perspective, what is the impact on advertising on the average consumer or even on the medical professional? And is it having an impact on overall increases in pharmacy costs?
Yeah, well, probably similar to you, like you, I would love to sit through an evening TV show or an evening newscast without having to observe and watch a number of advertisements on the TV about a medication. You know, who can forget sort of that red fish that's swimming through all the tubes that is advertising an anticoagulation drug, or that woman who seems to be able to do everything in a day, go to the beach, go swimming, go to the fair at night, eat cotton candy, all of that because of her MS medication. Or, as you can see in this next slide, that sort of helmeted great toe that sits there that's, you know, treating a toenail fungus infection. We don't see ads for inexpensive medications anymore. You don't see ads for, particularly for Tylenol or for, you know, Bayer aspirin or some of those medications. What you see are ads for these very expensive classes of medications that are used for the treatment of disease states such as cancer, diabetes, various coagulopathies. There was just a couple months ago, there was an op-ed piece in the Wall Street Journal that had to say this about drug advertising. Pharmaceutical companies have been spending money like drunken sailors. And I thought that just sort of epitomized what is actually happening in the marketplace right now. It's really reached a point in that the American Medical Association at the end of last year actually voted to ban pharmaceutical or drug advertising, expressing their concern that the negative impact of these commercially driven promotions and the role that marketing costs play in fueling escalating drug costs. Other professional organizations, such as pharmacy, have also followed suit.
It's plain to see how advertising and specialty medicines, the pipeline, FDA, changes at the FDA and the acceleration of the approval process, brand price increases, and then new medicines that are on the medical benefit are all contributing to the 6.3, 6.4% compound annual growth rate increase in pharmacy spend that we're experiencing within the industry itself. Let's now switch over to OmedaRx and what we're doing from a clinical perspective, from a clinical program perspective as well, in terms of solutions or tools that we're implementing to help manage these rising costs. And let's start with one of the more intriguing questions, which is how do you know how does an individual, how does a prescriber, how does a consumer understand and know which medicine is right or wrong or appropriate or inappropriate for them for their given health condition?
Okay. Well, there's certainly a number of factors that have to be evaluated when we're deciding whether a medication is the right one to use for a specific disease state or not. If you can see from this graphic, about 80% of medications provide really no additional benefit to medications that are already on the market. But that means that there is 20% that are either better or worse, and so we really need to be able to understand which one is which. So we have developed a really rigorous process to determine that. I like to think of our pharmacy clinicians as sort of private investigators. They go after, they research, they investigate to determine the safety and the efficacy and the value of a medication. And they look at not only the published literature, what's easily available, but they also dig further into what's not been published to really get to the information that maybe somebody doesn't want us to see. But we dig into that. We also look at and talk to physician experts in the community and elsewhere and leading researchers to obtain the most up-to-date information about that drug. Well, it turns out that we're actually pretty good at doing this. We have this rigorous process to support making the right clinical choices for our members has been recognized by a national organization called ICER, or Institute for Clinical and Economic Review. This organization is a nonprofit organization that's a leader in evaluating effectiveness and value in healthcare. As OmedaRx is the first and only pharmacy benefit manager that has received this recognition, we're rightfully very proud of that recognition. A great example of really our ability to focus on safety and effectiveness rather than cost as the driving factor for choosing what medications are right, it was a recent decision that we made on Vicarapac. So this drug is used, as you know, in the treatment of Hep C, And although the cost of this medication was less expensive than other options on the marketplace at that time, our pharmacist clinicians had concerns about the side effect profile and the fact that this drug had to be given with another medication that had its own list of side effects and the additional monitoring requirements required by this drug. And all of that sort of raised concerns about the ability of members to remain adherent to the medication. And as you know, with Hep C, we need the patients to be adherent to their medications. So unlike other large PBMs, we chose not to prefer this medication for the treatment of Hep C, a conclusion that was later supported by warnings that came out from the FDA.
It's interesting. I did have a chance to read the ICER final report as it related to evidence-based medicine, and one of the pieces that was really relevant for me was the number of pharmacists that we have at OmedaRx, and then our multidisciplinary approach. And from a clinical perspective, how important is that when we look to make medication policies or drug reviews easy to understand for the consumer or for prescribers?
Yeah. So we have about a dozen pharmacy clinicians that really work in this area and pull together all of this information, and they come from very diverse backgrounds. Some of them come from academia, some of them come from retail, some of them come from really hospital settings. Bringing all of that experience and expertise with them to how they look at medications and how they review them and pull together this information. Not only our pharmacists are a very diverse group, but also the physician group that we work with. Physicians that are members of our P&T committee, our Pharmacy and Therapeutics Committee, come from our 4-state region. They have differing training and expertise. They work in different fields of medicine, and they all bring their expertise to that setting as well.
All right, thank you. It sounds like number one, absolutely critical, is knowing which medicines are right and good, and then being able to translate that into easy to understand and applicable language.
Yeah, and as you can see here on the right-hand side of this graphic, there's a little table that talks about some of the products that are developed directly out of our drug our drug policies, our drug monographs that we write, that help not only clinicians but also our staff and our members to understand why the decision was made, what they need to understand about those medications. So communicating that out to our physicians, our staff, and our consumers is really important.
Switching now to the consumer side or the patient side, recent study by PricewaterhouseCoopers of large employers in the U.S. HR departments and HR leaders identified employee engagement as the number one concern for professionals, and the concern is how to engage employees in improving their health and well-being, whether that be choosing the right provider location, engaging in wellness behavior. How does OmedaRx, from a clinical perspective, approach this challenge that our customers are experiencing and that the industry is experiencing as well?
So we know that to be really successful in managing medication costs today, the consumer needs to be an integral part of it. They cannot be ignored. In the past, we tended to focus our resources on the provider, thinking that if we could give the provider the information that they need and appropriate support tools, they would make right decisions for their patients. But healthcare is not this sort of one-way street as it used to be in the past, and so patients are really clamoring to be not only part of the discussion, but also part of the solution. So we've developed a number of programs and incentives to help provide the consumer with tools that they need to help make better healthcare decisions for themselves. For example, multi-tiered formulary options have been developed to allow consumers more choice. We have an optimum value list and generic incentive programs which are offered to encourage consumers to choose effective, lower costing medications. We also have programs such as helping patients align their refills so they get all their refills filled at the same time, which encourage we encourage consumers to use mail order or 90-day retail fills, which will result in improved adherence to their medications. You also mentioned sort of the well care. So Regence as a whole also has well care options that they provide.
Clarifying question for you. You mentioned earlier biosimilars. And how would biosimilars fit into this smart choice formulary you see on the left-hand side?
So a number of the, we as part of our, like for example, our 6-tier formulary process, we have both preferred and non-preferred specialty drugs. Our biosimilars, they will, if and when they're available on the market, and if and when the costs come down enough, they will fall within the preferred specialty.
Okay, thank you. Early on when we were talking about key drivers, we mentioned that medicines, over 50% of the cost of medicines on the blockbuster specialty pipeline are on the medical benefit side. And we know from the last 10 years that managing the pharmacy benefit side, we've become, as an industry, we've become very good at it from a prior authorization, a quantity limit, a step therapy perspective. Share a little bit about, from your perspective, from a clinical perspective, what's going on from a utilization management or an integrated formulary management standpoint to really manage those medicines that are on the medical benefit as well.
Well, you know, Rich, the funny thing about diseases are that they don't really care about whether the medication you're giving the patient is to treat the disease. To treat the diseases on the pharmacy benefit side or on the medical benefit side of the fence. They don't care. So at OmedaRx, we're the same way. We really are indifferent as to whether the medication will be paid for out of the pharmacy benefit or out of the medical benefit. We want to help manage both clinically and cost-wise both of those types of medication. We're really interested in the holistic management for that individual patient. So that's the way that our pharmacist clinicians really approach the management of specific diseases. They look at both the pharmacy benefit drugs as well as the medical benefit drugs. This enables us to get to that place where we're delivering on these 5 rights: the right patient, the right medicine, right provider, right channel, and right time. A good example that can really demonstrate our integrated holistic approach to medications is, for example, the treatment of migraines. So you might have a patient that presents to the emergency room with a severe migraine, and one of the options that they might be offered is Botox. Now, Botox requires a prior authorization, and because we manage the medical PAs as well as the pharmacy PAs, we will engage in that conversation with the providers as to, is Botox the most appropriate medication for that patient? We have the opportunity at that time to provide clinical support to that provider regarding medications that are under their medical benefit. We provide important clinical information to the provider about alternatives, and as well as being able to share with them guidance around the patient's use or lack thereof of prophylactic medications that could help them prevent the recurrence of that migraine. This is just an example. There are a number of other places. So, for example, the treatment of multiple sclerosis or asthma, disease states where there are drugs both on the pharmacy benefit as well as on the medical benefit side that are used in the treatment of that disease.
2 questions for you on that. That's an interesting topic. Can any pharmacy benefits organization manage these holistically, or is it unique to OmedaRx? And then second, how would an employer or a consultant evaluate whether this type of program is successful or not? Are there quality indicators or cost savings indicators that you look at from a clinical perspective?
Yeah. So, you know, as medication usage become much more complex and benefit designs continue to become much more complex as well, it's really key, it's really absolutely key for employer groups to look at and evaluate the ability of their pharmacy benefit manager to integrate both medical and pharmacy formulary management. At OmedaRx, we're able to do that because we have access to both of those. It's important because if you can't apply utilization management edits to both sides, you're going to be missing out on a section or segment of the total cost of care for that patient. We have looked at that internally, and we've demonstrated that we, through that integrated holistic approach by managing both the medical and pharmacy benefits, we're actually have demonstrated an 18.5% medication cost savings through this process.
So it sounds like there's a quality and a cost savings component
Absolutely.
to this as well.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk a little bit more about specialty. Specialty seems different. It's not just me going to my local pharmacy, standing in a line, putting in my prescription, and picking up and going home and taking a tablet. It sounds like there are needles involved. It sounds like maybe a specialist involved. some just interesting ways or different ways of me experiencing an experience with medicine. What can you share about specialty itself and about the patient experience and how important it is to provide a different type of care to a person who is taking a specialty medicine?
Well, as we've talked about, specialty medications are special. And there's a subset of them that require some special handling for a number of reasons. They may be very difficult for the patient to administer to themselves. They may require specialized training for them to take that medication. There's storage requirements that we talked about before where they need to be refrigerated or frozen, or they may have special monitoring requirements to help ensure their safe utilization. Some of these requirements can be really overwhelming for patients. It's very difficult if you've not given yourself an injection in the past to learn how to do that. If you're scared of needles, that can be a really frightening thing for patients to have to learn. The biggest risk is that patients will not use the medication due to their own fear or their lack of understanding of their disease state and how this drug can help them. Many pharmacies, there's really only select pharmacies that have the capability or the capacity to really manage the complexities of these medications and to ensure that the members are getting the most value out of these very complex medications. So we have implemented an integrated specialty medication program to help us deal with that. This program works directly with the patient to provide them with really helpful knowledge about their disease state. They'll mail the medication directly to their home. They'll help train them on how to administer it, how to store the medication. They'll actually help them connect with other patients that have similar or the same disease so they don't feel like they're all alone in the world. And they'll also help them discover if there's opportunities to take advantage of some cost reduction strategies such as coupons from the manufacturer. But what's really cool also, I think, about this program is that the pharmacist has the capability of visiting with the patient right in the comfort of the patient's own home through video conferencing. So they'll sit down with the patient the first time they get their medication. They'll do an educational session with them. They'll teach them how to administer the medication. They really develop a relationship with that patient and with their families. Data from this program has shown that patients who take advantage of that video conferencing actually increase their adherence to their medication by 10%. Really, really important.
Dr. Reitz, you mentioned a 10% increase in adherence and compliance, which is fantastic. You also mentioned not being adherent and compliant as a big risk. What happens if someone is on a specialty medicine and then they stop taking it? Is there a more adverse healthcare event that happens? Does it incur more cost? Does it become more sicker? What is the big risk?
Well, certainly it's going to depend on the drug and the disease state that they have. But certainly, if you think of some medications that they're on and they're they don't demonstrate compliance, they can become more ill. They can actually develop different side effects from the medication when they take it. And ultimately down the road, that long-term cost of care increases because now they're moving on to potentially inpatient care or other really costly sites of care.
Okay, thank you for that. Let's switch to another industry phenomenon that we've seen over the last several years, and that is hospitals, facilities, delivery systems purchasing medical groups, individual medical groups, larger multidisciplinary practices. What impact has this had on pharmacy overall, if any, and is it driving any of the additional costs that we're seeing as an industry for pharmacy spend?
You know, that trend we see, and certainly it impacts OmedaRx just like it's impacting all of healthcare across the nation. Lots of those hospitals and other systems that are merging are impacting our ability to provide really efficient care for our patients in many ways. Although we cannot stem the tide of these mergers and acquisitions, we can, and we have actually taken a stance on the increasing medication costs by working directly with the healthcare systems to control these costs and by providing patients with alternatives. So we call this innovative program site of care. And early on, we understood that patients would benefit by having choices regarding where they received their infused medications. So, is it really necessary for a patient to travel to a distant hospital facility, then have trouble finding parking, getting lost in that hospital labyrinth of hallways to find where they actually are going to go and get their medication infused? Or could the patient actually benefit both financially and emotionally from receiving their infusion safely and effectively in an alternative site, including their home? So over the past 3 to 4 years, we've worked really closely with various healthcare facilities, infusion sites, home care nursing, to develop a program that allows patients to receive medications in alternative sites of care. This program started out as a voluntary program, but because of its success, it's really grown to be a mandated program for those employer groups who opt into it. We have been nationally recognized for this program, and we've spoken at various venues across the country as others want to hear about the successes that we've experienced with this program. You can see from this graphic, it shows a little bit of sort of relative cost. If you went to the hospital, that medication, in this example, I think we're using Remicade, costs about $24,000 for you to have it infused, versus if you have it at home or at an outpatient facility, outpatient hospital clinic, or within an infusion center, it can cost between $5,000 and $6,000. So a significant cost savings for the patient, as well as the plan, and as well as just better care for the patient.
So certainly from a clinical perspective, there's a cost component that's important, but as a clinician, one of your primary goals is to make sure the patient feels safe and it's a comfortable environment and the quality of care. Is there a component of safety and quality in this type of model?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's really a limited number of drugs. There's a list of drugs that fall within this site of care, and these are medications that we know can and have shown to be safe and effective when administered in an alternative site of care. So it's not, we just haven't opened it up to all medications. We're very thoughtful about which drugs end up in this program.
Well, we've talked about quite a lot. We've talked about knowing which medicines are right and which medicines are wrong. We've talked about engaging the consumer. We've talked about holistic and integrated medication policies and utilization management, personalized specialty care, and now site of care. I'm putting myself in the shoes of a listener today, and from their perspective, they're probably saying, well, how do I know all these things work? How do I know that they're having an impact on that dramatic increase in pharmacy spend over time? And so from your perspective, as you look broadly at the industry and then as you look at OmedaRx, what do you see as success measures in the performance overall for these programs?
Well, as you mentioned, we started out today talking about drug trends. And if you looked back at that first graph that we had up, the CMS data showed that 6.3% increase that's going to continue from now at least until 2020. All of us on the phone are probably seeing the same thing. We at Omeda are seeing the same thing as well. And if you look at the graphic on the left here, you can see that our trends are increasing, just like they are nationally. We see both traditional medications, but primarily specialty medications, that top later blue bar, increasing significantly over time. But we do take comfort in the fact that when we compare ourselves to our competitors nationally, which include about 20 different health plans with about 2 million members, our per member per month costs, or PMPM costs, are about 14 to 15% lower than theirs, and you can see that on the right-hand side of this graphic. These lower costs are really a direct result of some really very hard work that we have done to help manage these costs while still staying true to our commitment to provide excellent evidence-based care to our patients. So, is that all? I mean, is there more that we could be doing? Absolutely. We will continue. We're continuing to build on what we've set as a foundation. We're not done. We have a number of different programs that we're continuing to build and to learn and to develop and to test. For example, one of the things that we're looking at is expanding our site of care program to include other medications like oncology medications or perhaps blood factors. We're also looking at ways to expand our partnership with health plan like Regions regarding care management to help improve the care of patients that are requiring complex medication management. So as we discover these new areas where we can improve both on cost and quality, we'll certainly share these opportunities with you as well as our solutions as we develop them.
So it sounds like it's just not a point-in-time cost savings amount. It's a over time trend management, strategy that you're advocating here and what OmedaRx puts in place?
Yeah, none of this can be just one-time thing. This is an ongoing effort that we will continue to build on, and we've really built a really strong foundation, and so we're going to continue to build from that.
All right, thank you, Dr. Reitz. We are now going to turn it back over to the audience to ask any questions that they may have.
And remember, for those of you in the audience, you can submit a question by typing them in the chat box, and we'll send them over to our presenters. We can see some people typing, so Rich and Shirley, feel free to take a drink before we begin answering. For our audience, if we run out of time or if we have questions that need additional research, we will follow up on those after the webinar. Okay, Rich and Shirley, I'm passing it back to you.
Dr. Reitz, one of the first questions here has to do with brand and generics, and you mentioned, you mentioned earlier on in the presentation that in 2011 or 12 there was a significant number of generic drugs that move from brand to generic. Are there is that going to happen again, or are there any drugs that are medicines that are moving from brand to generic this year?
Certainly, there's always that opportunity. We saw that huge, what we call patent cliff in 2012, which really pushed a number of generics on the marketplace. This year, what we're looking forward to is the drug Crestor, which is going to go generic later this, or has gone generic, and so we're starting to see some of the cost savings from that. And there will be other medications as well. So that's an ongoing process. It's just not as many as what we've seen in the past, and the drug price dropping is not as quickly as it has been in the past.
Okay, thank you. Here's another question. How do I make sure I manage both the medications in our pharmacy benefit and the medications on the medical benefit?
Well, first of all, you have to have the data, right? You have to have access to the data. You need to be able to see both the costs on the pharmacy side as well as on the medical side. So that's number one. Number two, you need to not only have the data, but you need to have resources or tools in place to help manage the costs both on the pharmacy and medical side. You know, most pharmacy benefit managers have really good tools for managing pharmacy benefit. They're less likely to have the tools to manage the medical benefit. So it's really, you know, making sure, number one, you can get the data and combine them together, and number two, that you have the ability to develop those tools to manage both the pharmacy and medical costs.
Okay, thank you. Here's a question regarding resources. What is a good resource for following pharmacy cost trends? And is there an easy way to know what's going on? I'll take a shot at this one. Yeah, we've got a couple of folks that are in market right now, Jeff Griggs and Dan Richards, and they are very sophisticated in their knowledge of what's going on in the pharmacy industry. And certainly you can get in touch with them, or get in touch with them directly, or get in touch with them through your Regent's account executive. I'd be happy to share with you information about trends. Other than that, Shirley, are there other organizations and data points within the industry?
Yeah, there's a number of publications that come out on sort of a semi-annual or annual basis. For example, one that we referred to today had to do with IMS. They come out with sort of a review of what's going on with drug costs and trends on an annual basis. It's a great publication to look at and see and get sort of a feel of what's going on. So you can Google it and you'll find those things. They're very often you can get them at no cost, so they're free.
And we have one last question, which is, will folks have access to these slides after the webinar? And yes, our intent is to email out this deck to the participants on the call today. And thank you, Dana. That's all the questions that we see, unless there are more from the audience.
Well, great. Everyone is welcome to join our next webinar on July 14th from noon to 1. You can always find the latest information for the RxTalks webinar series in the events section on OmedaRx.com. We will send a follow-up message to everyone on the call today, including today's presentation, like Rich mentioned. Feel free to complete the survey when you disconnect from today's call and let us know what you thought about our session today. And thank you, everyone, for attending today's call, and have a great day.